Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those who are joining us this evening on live stream, and we've done a further test and believe our audio quality is improved from last meeting. We apologize if there was some issues with that. And like to welcome councillor colleagues joining us through video conference this evening. Councillors Duncan, Councillors O'Keefe, Councillor Fallot, and Councillor Wainwright. And I'd like to call our special council meeting for Monday, April 20th to order. I'd like to acknowledge we're holding this evening's meeting in the traditional and ancestral lands of the Wasanich people. I'd also like to take a moment. I want to express the heartfelt condolences of our Sydney community to the families and communities in Nova Scotia after the senseless mass shootings that have occurred. When I think of our small, close-knit community, I cannot imagine the level of grief and with families and communities in Nova Scotia. Our thoughts are also with all members who serve in the RCMP over the loss of one of their members in the line of duty. We are, as ever, grateful for your service and protection of our communities. I'll now turn to our agenda and look for approval of our agenda.
I'll move adoption.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We do have a single item on our agenda. It's an important item. It's a follow-up to last week on property tax relief measures, and I'd like to ask Chief Financial Officer Andrew Hissick to introduce the item this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The purpose of this meeting is to provide council with one last opportunity to reconsider options for reducing the municipal taxes, as well as changes to the due date, following receipt of additional information from the province last Thursday. You'll recall that at a meeting on April 14th, council had considered a series of options for reducing the taxes, as well as options for a new due date or penalty date. And the options were dependent somewhat on the province not stepping up and putting measures in place province-wide. And they did that on Thursday, April 16th. And I believe it's wise for us to have a reconsideration or reconfirmation before we move ahead. So the decisions taken by council at the last meeting were to reduce the general tax increase to 0 for all classes of property, and either reducing commercial and light industrial property taxation by an additional 5% or by an additional 10%. In addition to that, council had considered delaying the property tax due date from July 2nd to later in the year. And at that time, staff had recommended September 15th as our first deadline, followed by December 15th as our second for the remaining 5% penalty. However, last Thursday, the province came out with a series of announcements related to tax measures, and the most relevant aspects of those announcements are as follows. There's a further reduction to the provincial school tax burden for commercial properties. This would be over and above the previously announced 50% reduction that was already in place. In addition to that, they had applied a province-wide penalty date of October 1st for business properties. Effectively, that took the decision out of our hands, but we still have the option for setting our own due dates and penalty dates for residential. And the other relevant announcement they made was delaying the provincial school tax remittance to the end of the year. And if you'll recall, that was one of the factors in myself recommending a September 15th due date previously, because the date we set would have set the timeline for the payment to the province of school taxes. Now we don't have to worry about that, so we can reconsider what dates we choose to apply. So there are two factors that we should be considering tonight. One is, should the town provide additional tax relief to commercial properties now that the province has already done so? And two, should the tax due date for residential properties be moved up from the previously recommended date of September 15th? So first of all, with respect to municipal tax relief, at the last meeting, the 1.79% general increase was rolled back to zero for all property classes, and council was deciding between additional relief of 5% or 10% for commercial and light industrial properties. So given the provincial announcement, council might wish to reconsider the options for business properties. And I would add that should council wish to pursue additional tax relief for business, and perhaps for residential as well, I would strongly recommend at this time that a firm choice be made among the options presented, and that would be advertised in the Thursday edition of the Peninsula News Review for public input, with the results of that consultation being available for next Monday's meeting for an ultimate decision. Following on from that, we would bring forward the financial plan bylaw, the tax rates bylaw, and the alternative tax collection scheme bylaw on May 11th. A quick word on the property tax due dates. So the provincial announcement established a province-wide penalty date for most classes of business property. And it's been clarified that the province will not be changing the due date for those properties, simply the penalty date. And that's somewhat unusual because generally the two go hand in hand. So that you have a due date, and the day after that would be the penalty date. So anything not paid by the due date would be penalized the day after. So they've made it clear that they're leaving the due date as is, July 2nd, and that's something I think we should follow for residential, and simply play around with the penalty dates. And the rationale for that is it's further indication that it does matter to the municipality when the money starts rolling in. It has an impact on our cash flows and our operations. So for those who are able to pay on the traditional July 2nd due date, we'd appreciate it. But if you can't, you will not be penalized until later. So individual municipalities are still free to establish their own penalty dates, should they wish to do so, under an alternative municipal tax collection scheme bylaw. And the town had previously set a common set of dates for all classes of property, and now the province has dealt with the business classes, but I still believe that we can turn that October 1 penalty date for business into a two-stage penalty, whereby we would apply only 5% on October 1 and the remaining 5% at a later date, which I'm proposing to be December 15th. So what I'm recommending now is that the following penalty dates be considered for property classes 1, 2, and 9, being residential, utility, and farm. We have one farm property. That 5% for amounts outstanding after July 31st be applied as a penalty, and the additional 5% on December 15th. And for property classes 5, 6, and 8, which is light industrial, business, and recreational, which for us implies marina, 5% on October 1 and the other 5 on December 15th. Now the benefit to the town would be that if we do move up the residential penalty date to essentially August 1, we believe that we might get away without doing any interim financing, even though we have that bylaw in place, because our first big chunk of money going out the door would be essentially on August 4th, when we're responsible for paying the CRD requisition as well as the hospital. So that's about $5 million, and if we move up the penalty date for residential, given that there are relief measures in place for those properties in terms of they qualify for the homeowner grant, as well as tax deferment options for those over 55 or families with children, we believe that enough measures are in place to justify moving up that due date and having it earlier than the commercial. With that, I'll open it up for questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik. I'll open it up to council if they have any questions for Mr. Hisik. Councillor Wainwright, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question for Andrew. Um, this is regarding the SBIA levy, and I appreciate we collect that at the same time as the regular property tax. When do we transfer that levy to the SBIA?
Thank you, Councillor. That levy is paid in two installments, one at the beginning of the year to assist them with cash flow, and the other when taxes are collected, which would normally be July, but now it would very likely be later in the year, subject to them being able to carry on operating without some measure of additional financing.
Thank you for the question and the answer. Any other questions of Mr. Hizik? I just wanted to, for reference, before we have a motion and discussion, that if we, with the new Appendix D or revised Appendix D before us, we see option 3 with the increased provincial support through school taxes results in a 20.6% reduction, would be an actual 20.6 reduction in the average commercial tax bill. And for comparison purposes, last week when we were considering that option, prior to the province increasing their contribution, if we had given a 5% reduction, it would have resulted in a 15.7% reduction. So that's something to consider. And if for option 4, we see without a reduction from the town of Sydney, it would be a 23.5% reduction. And if we did give a 10% reduction on top of that, or sorry, last week, with the reduced provincial contribution to school taxes, it would have been an 18.5% overall reduction. And if we were to give it a 10% on top of what the province is doing now, it would be a 23.5%. So we can just see the differences of that 5% in options 3 and 4 between our additional support from last week to this week. So we do have a recommendation. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the other things that I think is worth pointing out from the figures is that if you look at option 2, which is where we simply have a zero tax increase across the board, commercial is looking at a 17.8% reduction overall. If we then do an additional 5% reduction, the change only goes to 20.6. So that's actually only, so we do a 5% reduction, but they only see a 2.8% change in their overall tax. And in the case of option 4, if we give a 10% reduction, they only see an overall change of 5.7. So those reductions that we were considering are not really coming through that effectively. And in fact, the base scenario of us not giving any additional reduction for commercial winds up better than the best option we were looking at last time. So I have to say I'm not, I don't see any merit in pursuing either option 3 or 4. I'm inclined to either go with just across the board 0% increase, or I'd actually be willing to consider the across the board 1% reduction. But I'm not in favor of the 2 options that we were looking at last time.
Thank you. That's important to note as well. Councillor Duncan, you have the floor.
Actually, I'm not sure. Maybe I should hold my comment until we move it and discuss it. But whatever, I have the floor. I was going to say the same thing. Although I would also note that in addition to the fact that We don't get as much savings to the commercial properties with options 3 and 4 as we did last time. Those ones also still result in shifting tax burden to the residential properties that options 2 and option 6 do not. And it's not a large tax burden. It was, how to say it in a way that Mr. will approve of. Instead of a reduction of $42, it would only be a reduction of $22 for option 3. So it looks like you're failing to save residential taxpayers an additional $20 if you go with option 3. Whereas if we go with something like option 6, where it's across the board small decrease, it doesn't end up those shifting of the other government burdens onto our taxpayers, and they continue to get that full, very small 1% increase, which is I think $42. So it saves roughly $80 for the average residential taxpayer.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I'm still in favor of option 3. I thought it was a good idea last time. I still think it is. The amount there gives some moderate amount of support to business community. I note Mr. Hissick's comments in regards to residential tax rates, and that there are significant number of programs available to residential ratepayers through different programs and that sort of thing. So I'm happy to still support option 3 is where I'm leaning at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some excellent points brought up by other councillors. I'm still leaning towards option 4. I can live with option 3. I just feel like as a council, we need to show our businesses that we really support them, and I want to do that in the maximum way possible. I understand Councillor Wainwright's argument about what percentages we're giving and what we're getting back, but I'm just looking at the bottom dollar from that perspective, and there's things, wage subsidies coming in, potential rent, help with rent through the federal and provincial government working together. This is what we can do as a council. It's pretty much one of the only things we can do to help them. And it's not just about the businesses themselves. I'm thinking about their employees. Some of the numbers I'm hearing from the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses are not looking good at who's going to reopen once this is all over. And that's bound to affect our community as well. So I want to try and do everything I can possibly to support our local small businesses, just for them as well as their employees, because when it comes down to it, if there's people that close their shops up here, there's people that don't have work. And I'm trying to think of something that's going to do the most impact for the most amount of people in our community. So I still support option 4, but I can live with option 3.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I concur with Councillor Garnett. This is the town's opportunity to make a contribution here. We've seen what the province has done, and we know about some of the federal programs that have come forward. I still like the 0% general tax position for residential properties and the 10% general tax decrease for commercial and light industrial. Like Councillor Garnett, I think this is what staff have told us they're still comfortable with. It gives, I think, the strongest message that the town can, as a council, that we recognize that this is going to lead to ourselves, looking at our own budget, looking at, review of expenses potentially to fit this all in. But we're going to have to go through some of those steps and measures, undoubtedly, the same way residents of Sydney are as they face their own personal challenges and businesses. So I want to send the strongest signal we can to the business community, and to me that continues to be option 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fallot, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I really like to look at option 4. I do want to support our business community in the best possible way that we can do so. Not forgetting that what we're doing here also is going to have long-term impacts because of the reduced money that we're getting in and what we're able to do, what our strategic plans are and whatnot. And I realize the whole world has been turned upside down in this last several months, and more so in this last month. But I do want to make sure that the public and the business community understands that there may very well be consequences to us doing this cut. I think we're doing it for the right reasons. I think it's the right thing to do, and I can support option 4.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll add my comment that I had a preference for option 3, which was a 5% reduction for commercial, but I can support option 4. We most recently heard from Dr. Bonnie Henry when they presented the information last Friday and questions from the media on Saturday that we know this is going to continue for a significant period of time, impacting our business community. While there is discussion, and there will be more discussion in approximately a month's time in terms of how measures may be relaxed, we know we're going to have to maintain the physical distancing. We know we're going to have to maintain the hygiene measures, and it's still going to be extremely difficult for most businesses to continue to operate. So they're not going back to normal anytime soon. And I think for my colleagues who mentioned the point of doing what we can at the municipal level, I want to thank the province for what they've brought forward in terms of first the 50% reduction in school taxes, and now going beyond that, such that they create a significant reduction in commercial taxes for commercial businesses. But we're looking at doing two things this evening, the possibility of doing two things. One is reducing our previous tax increase, previously approved tax increase of 1.79% to 0. I think there's unanimity amongst us on that. While there is some difference on the level of support to commercial, I think we do need to demonstrate what we're capable of. We do have very limited other measures to support commercial businesses, and continue to look to the provincial and federal government for additional support. So we do have a worded recommendation before us that allows us to make a motion with regards to what our preference might be on different aspects, and I would now turn to a councillor to move forward.
Sure, I will move the recommendation that the 2020-2024 financial plan be amended to reflect a 0% general tax increase for residential properties and a 10% general tax decrease for commercial and light industrial properties, with the offsetting funding to come from accumulated surplus.
Second.
We have that moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Two hands at the same time. I'll go with Councillor Duncan, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Councillor Fallot briefly touched on it when mentioning revenue loss before, and I think for the benefit of the public, because they don't have the same table in front of them. So when we consider option 4, we're looking at about a $550,000 revenue loss for the town. Option 3 is about $381,000. And option 6 that Councillor Wainwright and I spoke more in favor of was $335,000. So when you look at the amount we're going to be saving commercial businesses, hold on, I'm just going to pull that table back up again. It's right on the screen. All right, for number 4 here, we're going to save them an additional less than $400, about $370. I feel that's probably not going to be the difference, given the rental costs, the loss of business and everything that's going to keep a business running for the next year, 2 years probably, that we have to have these pandemic measures in place. However, it's a difference of about $160,000 to the town. And my question is, which puts the town itself and all of the businesses and people in it in a better position when we're looking at a recovery? Well, we're looking at a pandemic response of a solid 2 years at least, and then a recovery period that probably extends, if it's the same It's much bigger than the 2008 crash, and that took us 8 years to recover from. So we're looking at least 8 years from that. Which do we think the town can leverage into more support for our businesses and the people who live here? $300 per year per business, I don't think that's going to save anyone, but another $160,000 to $190,000 in the town, we might actually be able to do something with that for our recovery planning. So I know everyone's saying they want to send a signal to the businesses, but I feel like that's really all that measure would be, is sending a signal, but not actually providing something that would be meaningful going forward with. And I would be more interested in making sure that we're considering holistically what would be a meaningful gesture going forward, and not simply a signal like the equivalent of banging pots and pans, you know? So if we think that $300 saving each business will be a bigger difference, so we can go for that, or we think we can make up that revenue somehow, then I could support that. But as it stands, I feel that that's more for, it's going to be more for show than for actually preparing our town for the future.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, so I support leaning towards option 3. I'm not in favor of the options that provide just across the board reduction, because as noted before, there's other remedies available for residential taxpayers. So I would rather put whatever reduction we provide directly towards businesses. I think there's a number of them that will recognize that it's more than banging pots and pans. I think it's a good chunk of money. I think it's, you know, we have to keep in mind that this is just based on the average, the average as well. And the only reason that I'm not leaning towards the option for 10% is because I think, as the mayor indicated, this is something that is going to be lasting. It's not going to be resolved by the end of this year even. And so I'd like to have a little bit of our surplus left so that we can look at managing things a bit better in the coming year. Have something still available, say for economic development initiatives, rather than throwing most of our surplus at this. Thanks.
Councillor Wainwright, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to be voting against the motion that's on the floor. And I agree with my colleague, Councillor Duncan. And I also agree with Councillor O'Keefe. I think it is important for us to have some money available when things do start to loosen up a bit. I think we should be looking at some stimulus spending. And if we've basically blown our resources providing a commercial tax relief that, and I agree with Councillor Duncan, is probably not going to be enough for the ones who really need it, I think it's really going to tie our hands in terms of our ability to provide some stimulus. So, you know, for those reasons, I can't support the motion that's on the floor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate those comments. Certainly, it's an amount of money that I don't think any of us, you know, truly mean to discredit. And I think it's more than a symbolic gesture. No one, you know, that certainly isn't the intent here as it's being put forward. It's trying to, I think, shore up, frankly, public confidence as well that municipal governments are doing, you know, the most that they can. And this is one side of this equation in my mind, and that's why I continue to support this. The other side of the equation is the expense side. And we said at our last meeting, and it's been mentioned earlier this evening as well, that we need to critically look at our budget from the expense side as well. And I don't think that will, you know, leave us without opportunity to see us in a better position to be able to provide some of this recovery support when it's needed. So I continue to want to send that strong message and the sincere wish behind it that these breaks that we're affording commercial businesses in our community will be appreciated, and that we'll have opportunity to participate in recovery through critically looking at our expense budget as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I would like to make comment, if I will, and I'll start with, I think three important points have been raised by first speakers, and one is with regards to what percentage of our resources are we using up by giving this size of the surplus, or this amount of the surplus, and a comment was made that it might be most of our resource, or something to that effect. I'd pose a question to Mr. Hisik, that what do we have left in terms of room, in terms of flexibility for future stimulus this year, or I think next year, 2021, we certainly have many options before us. But if you could comment on the portion of the surplus that we're using now, or is suggested could be used now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The previous report indicated that we have roughly 800,000 in what I term excess surplus, which is over and above our minimum required by policy. So from that respect, I would be comfortable with any of the options presented here. But as Councillor Rintoul pointed out, at some point we will turn our attention to the expenditure side. So whatever we decide here to initially fund from surplus, some of it will be going back once we turn our attention to the revenue side. So I don't anticipate that if we choose to take out 350 or 500 now, that it'll all be gone. I think we'll make some of that up throughout the year. But having said that, there are no guarantees. We don't know what it's going to be like in 3-4 months. All I can say is if we aren't able to make additional reductions this year to our expenditures, this year's operations will be reflected in next year's budget, so we could be looking at a second year with reduced tax impacts, not just this one. Because we'll know by the end of this year, before we get into our next budget, what our operations look like, and if we realize more savings than we expected, that could certainly be reflected in year 2 or beyond.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik, and I'm taking that, given that where our total surplus levels are, with the opportunity that is perhaps before us in reviewing the budget on the expense side, that we do have some flexibility, because I think the point first raised by Councillor Wainwright last meeting and again tonight, that and others, that other colleagues, that stimulus in the future, while it's not something that municipalities have traditionally done, we know how extraordinary these times are, and that's something we will want to turn our minds to going forward. The third point I wanted to touch on was with regards to how significant $300 or whatever amount we wish to consider might be to business. Option 4 presents a $2,900 reduction to the average business that pays, last year paid $12,425 in total taxes. And I made the comment last week and will repeat this week that we have businesses that are paying 10 times that multiple. This is the average savings for an average business. And I think, particularly for larger businesses, that amount is greater and is of significance to businesses. So I'll continue to support option 4. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just quickly want to say that I like to try and be a penny pincher in my own life, but when my chief financial officer tells me, and I have to rely on his expertise, that he's comfortable with any of these options, then I rely on his expertise in this particular instance, and so it gives me a fair amount of comfort with the decision I'd made to support option 4. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any speakers wishing to speak for a second time? Councillor Fallett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Um, Either which way, we've already come, we've been very careful when we brought forth our budget a few weeks back, and we came in at 1.79%. We already told our community that we're doing the best we can and to maintain services and bring our budget in at 1.79. Now, under this reassessment, we have dropped the 1.79, and we're looking at possibly the commercial side to drop at 5 or 10%. And I think nobody is going to be faulting us for trying to make the best possible decision for our community, whether we choose option 3 or option 4. I don't think either one will be seen as in a negative sense within our community. What is going to help our community to the best? We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen. And I think we have a very prudent and I think a relatively conservative financial officer, and one who is taking the care that he is in presenting these possibilities for council to decide. And I think, as I spoke in the beginning, and I said that I'm also looking at the future. This isn't just what we're going to do this year, it's what we're going to, how this is going to impact us in the future. And I'm willing to still continue supporting option 4. It would be great if we had pretty unanimous decision on this, but also respect we have different points of view and everybody's trying to do the best thing for the community in whichever way we go. But it's not just for this year. It is, as Councillor Duncan said, we've got several years ahead of us that we're going to be challenged with how we make things work. So I think right now we have to make this decision. None of us knows what's going to lie ahead. We're still we'll do the best we can when we come to next year's time. But I think we can go ahead and make our decision tonight on either those options, and it'll still be okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers wishing to speak another time? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? We have Councillors O'Keefe, Councillors Fallett, Councillors Garnett, Councillor Rintoul, and myself in favor. Opposed? We have Councillor Duncan and Councillor Wainwright opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, Council. That was a challenging decision, and I would just like to thank Mr. Hissack for the detailed information that he's provided us 2 weeks in a row. In particular, with the changes, some of them unexpected, but pleasantly unexpected from the provincial government. And a message I think I'd like to communicate on behalf of Council to the business community is we appreciate the enormity of what you're facing to continue business into the longer term in Sydney. And we know the federal government is bringing forward their initiatives. I think we're all hopeful they'll continue to bring initiatives forward as we hope and expect of the provincial government. And I think we've done something very significant at the local government level for the town of Sydney to reduce our previously approved tax increase to 0, and then to give this significant 10% reduction in addition to commercial properties. We've also followed the province in terms of the deferral, which I think will be significant for business as well. And we look forward to hearing more from the federal government on rent relief, which was just initially announced in the last few days, and any other measures they may bring forward. So thank you, and Council. Mr. Hissack.
We still have recommendation 2 to deal with if you're ready.
We do. Thank you. Do we have a mover for the second recommendation?
I'll move that staff be directed to bring forward an alternative municipal tax collection scheme bylaw featuring tax penalty dates as follows. A, property classes 1, 2, and 9, 5% for amounts outstanding after July 31st, an additional 5% for amounts outstanding after December 15th. And B, property classes 5, 6, and 8, 5% for amounts outstanding after September 30th, and an additional 5% for amounts outstanding after December 15th.
I'll second for the purpose of discussion.
Okay. I'll open it to discussion. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. And I'm assuming that the due date will continue to be July 2nd then, is that correct?
That is the intention, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm happy with that. I think that's a reasonable July 2nd and July 31st for the first penalty. I'm happy to support that motion. Thank you.
Any other discussion, Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if I'll pose a question, but a comment, and then maybe Mr. Hisik, if you want to address it if you see fit. So the last time we talked about a due date around residential taxes, we landed on September the 15th.
Yeah.
Where we were imposing the first level of penalty at that point, and now we're moving that back in time, or moving it ahead, so to speak, to a due date of July 31st in the first hand, with the penalty coming into play at 5% as of that date. So, can you speak a little bit further to the specific rationale? Because my concern is obviously that for some residents, it may well be a challenge to get this together and to make their payment before the 31st of July, before penalty would incur. And we recognized that at our last meeting, and that's why we came up with September 15th. So for those people, and I get that July 2nd is still the date. People could pay early. That helps us with cash flow. We'll encourage them to do so. But it feels like we're kind of, we moved the goal line here, in my mind, in the wrong direction. So just speak to a little bit about, why it's being proposed in this manner, please.
Sure, thank you, Councillor. One of the largest factors in the previously chosen date was the desire to delay when the school tax collections had to be remitted to the province, because our first large payment that goes out the door on school taxes is 5 days after our chosen due date. So now that the province has essentially moved all those payments to the end of the year, regardless of what we do, that large factor is off the table. So that's the biggest factor in moving up the residential due date. I would say regionally, we've all been talking since the province came out and made their announcement on Thursday, and virtually everybody has their first penalty date August 1st or thereabouts. So either the due date's either the first day before the long weekend or the first day after. There would be some level of region-wide consistency by doing that. Also, with residential properties, I mentioned there are relief measures in place. Not everyone wants to take advantage of those, but in taking a closer look at how many of our residential properties either prepay their taxes through our annual payment plan, or pay through mortgage companies, or actually defer their taxes, that's estimated to be over a third of residential property taxes. And it could go even higher this year with additional deferments. So with school taxes off the table, I don't believe too many residential properties will be unduly burdened by this. Obviously, there might be some, but I don't think for those properties, September 15th would make that much difference either.
Councillor Rintoul.
Sorry, just in follow-up then, if I could. So you don't think too many individuals would be unduly burdened, and I understand why you're saying that's significant with regards to the school tax comment and how it relates to individual residential taxpayers. But would the town be unduly burdened if we maintain the date of September 15th that we had intended to at the last meeting?
Well, we would certainly survive it, but by doing it this way, we could avoid doing any short-term borrowing for cash flow purposes, because we should have enough money rolled in by the due date, the first due date, to make those regional requisition payments. Therefore, we're not having to go out and seek up to $5 million in interim financing.
If I may, one final, and this may be for the mayor, that $5 million you refer to the CRD. Have there been further discussions, either to staff or to the mayor, in terms of the timeline for municipalities to require to make payments to CRD? Is there the prospect of that timeline changing?
Actually, the province has addressed that with the announcement last week, if I understand correctly, Mr. Hisik, and what they've decided to do is manage this benefit to commercial property owners through the school tax and only the school tax, such that municipalities would remit all of the other taxes, including CRD, transit, library, at the normal due date times. Yeah, I think from discussions with Mr. Hisik, I think when he was speaking with his colleagues around the region, and perhaps you could confirm or correct me, Mr. Hisik, that there was really a bit more calculation put into how many residents under existing programs already benefit from possible deferrals, prepayments through mortgages, and it is quite significant. So it would be a smaller group than perhaps originally anticipated that would benefit from the deferral, from a longer deferral period.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we believe that between the over 55 program and families with children, that should cover the majority of our residents if they are in need of deferring even this year's taxes. Doesn't mean they have to do it on an ongoing basis, but they may choose to do it on a one-time basis to get through this year.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? We have one councillor opposed, Councillor Rintoul. The motion carries. Thank you. So we have Mr. Hisik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of advertising in the PNR on Thursday, perhaps council could give me a bit of guidance as to what you see the important consultation points. So we'll be advertising that council has decided to roll back the general tax increase to 0 and to further reduce business taxes by 10%. And basically put it out there to people. Are you in general agreement with this, or would you prefer some other option, and then bring that back to the next meeting?
I think the information that you've suggested, in addition to what the new penalty dates will be, would be informative. I realize that taxpayers will see that certainly when they receive their property tax notice. I guess we're looking for input from the public. Are they comfortable with the level of support, with the amount that we're drawing from surplus? Given the options that are still left before us in terms of reviewing expenses or future possibilities for support. So,
okay.
Does any other councillors? Councillor O'Keefe, I see. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Just a question for Mr. Hisik. So, am I correct in assuming that when we put it out to the public, that you would be explaining that council is proposing to take that from surplus, so that they know how we're planning to do that, rather than immediately cut services or programs, that sort of thing?
Certainly that could be a focus of the advertisement, yes.
Yeah, I think it's important for taxpayers to know, not just that we're going to do that, but what the impact will be. Yes. Residential taxpayers might want to know. Does that mean then that as a residential taxpayer that I'm going to have to pay significantly more or a little bit more? So perhaps we could round that out a little bit for them.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further okay, so that's provided guidance to Mr. Hisik, thank you. My last comment is through the EOC update report that we had from Mr. Humble last week, we heard of the work that's being done on the advanced recovery planning and staff being assigned to that. The different elements of that recovery plan, including cultural, sustainability, resilience, and recovery for our business community. And I just wanted to say that as part of my earlier remarks in terms of support to the community, we do have a detailed advanced recovery plan in the works. There is a significant component for the business community, our local economy, and that we will have an update from the EOC on aspects, not the full recovery plan yet, but we will have aspects and framework presented to Council at our Council meeting next Monday evening, and also available to the public. So thank you, Council, thank you, staff, and I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thanks for joining us by teleconference this evening, colleagues.
Thank you.